Well, Helldivers 2 is coming to Xbox, and everybody's response has been totally reasonable and calm. No, I'm kidding. It's not been like that at all. But I do think it's legitimate for people to be worried or concerned or frustrated. And ultimately, I think people are asking the big question. Why is this happening? Like, is this the signal that PlayStation is changing? Everybody sort of watched Xbox change over the course of its life, and it started with putting games on other platforms day and date. Once they started putting games on PC, many people said that's the beginning. They're going to become a third-party publisher. They're going to start deprioritizing their console. It took a while, but we eventually got here, okay? And so people are thinking that PlayStation may be doing the same thing. Or maybe they're just changing their approach with live service games, because they have said for the longest time that, oh, well, our live service games will be multi-platform. I actually don't think any of those questions really get to the heart of the issue, which is, why now? Why at this stage of the game would you suddenly be bringing one of your more successful titles? Like, PlayStation's been trying to do live service, and this is one of their more successful titles, and they're bringing it to Xbox. I think the timing is a bigger clue, and it really has to do with my theory about this getting debunked. I thought this was primarily initiated by Arrowhead. Some of their remarks in public really made me think this was something that they would have pushed for and would have negotiated for. But somebody who is more connected that I trust actually said this was something that was initiated by Xbox, which really made me think, oh, this is more in line with the recent shifts and changes at Xbox, which is why I'm saying Xbox is no longer a threat. And that is playing the biggest role here. I do not think we're seeing a signal of PlayStation changing. If we do, it'll be as evident as it was with Xbox. They were telling shareholders, they were on earnings calls, signaling these changes. We have not seen that from PlayStation yet. So I don't see any cause for concern in those realms. And I want to talk about why, because really, when you start to look at the status of Xbox right now, you will start to see why this is just not as much of a cause for concern and alarm as some people are making it. I mean, people are saying, oh, I'm done with PlayStation because of this. You're free to do that. If you think that's what you need to do, that's where your convictions take you, then by all means, do it. Now, there are other big questions here. Most notably, will the game even be successful on Xbox? Or is this going to sort of ring true with what many people have said, which is that you take stuff over there and it won't do very well because they foster this ecosystem of non-purchase with Game Pass? I actually think there's reasons that it could do very well. But there's also another side that could compel me to say that it's not going to do that well either. So we're going to look at both sides of that. But the thing I want to start with is my theory getting debunked is what really makes me think that Xbox is just not a threat anymore, and that's playing the biggest role here. So if at any point during this video you like what you hear, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. So my initial theory was that Arrowhead pushed for this. They had expressed interest that they wanted Helldivers 2 on Xbox. They even talked about how their next game would not be published by Sony, but they were still open to working with Sony. That felt like they were sort of flexing in the public and saying, hey, Sony, we've got some power here. We've got a big title that we made. You own the IP, but if you want to work with us again, we would really like to see our game on Xbox. Well, that's not what happened, okay? That's what I thought happened. Now, that could still be playing a role here, but that's not what happened, okay? So somebody, again, that I trust who has given me very reliable information in the past basically said this was initiated by Xbox, and they negotiated this. Now, that's important because what that means is this did not come from some initiation from PlayStation side of things where they were like, hey, we want to really change our strategy. Let's reach out to Xbox. So if Xbox is the one that started the conversation, then you have to ask the question, well, how would they convince PlayStation to do this? Now, Arrowhead still could have played a role here. Maybe there was a bit of a warm handshake of like, hey, we would really like this to happen. But fundamentally, if you really look at where Xbox has come as a brand, it's not hard to imagine how the conversation went. I mean, even recently, Sarah Bond basically said that their future is seeing Windows as the largest gaming platform. Well, what that means is all of their future devices will basically be Windows devices. Now, I originally thought if there is some hybrid console Windows device, they are going to try to stop PlayStation games working through Steam. I thought PlayStation would see this as something that kind of runs contrary to their strategy. They are on record as saying the reason they put these games on PC is hoping that they get people to come over to the console. Well, they've been sort of touting in their earnings reports a pretty high percentage, somewhere between 20 and 30% of their users on PS5 are brand new, like they weren't with PlayStation before. So they are getting new user acquisition. So at some level, parts of their strategy are working, okay? So I always thought, well, they'll try to stop that. But if Xbox came to the table and somehow convinced PlayStation that bringing Helldivers 2 to Xbox was not a threat or a problem, I think that has to do with the future commitment that Xbox has to hardware, and that is they are not doing traditional console ever again. They're letting other manufacturers make the hardware for them. And whatever comes out next from Xbox, if they do in fact do one last go-around that they make, like not something made by somebody else, it will likely just be some type of a Windows device that simplifies having essentially a PC in your living room. What this would mean then is that PlayStation has decided that that's not a threat and that's not a concern for them. There's also the theory from the person that I spoke to that this is largely due to seeing this as a refugee moment. There will be people sort of leaving Xbox, sort of coming over and deciding, listen, I'm done with this platform. They've made significant changes. They've made significant, moves that don't really vibe with a traditional console fan. And then when you see games like Perfect Dark getting canceled, you see studios getting shut down, you will start to see folks exit the platform, especially when future hardware looks even more different than it does now. It'll start to feel like, okay, wait, you're seemingly more committed to Windows than Xbox. And PlayStation may view that as an opportunity, just in the way that they view PC as like, hey, check out our game. It's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah, we'll come over and check out our console. Right now in the market, if you're going to abandon Xbox and make a new hardware purchase, a $450 PS5 is a lot cheaper than trying to do anything in the PC realm. So you're looking at $450, maybe you trade in some of your Xbox stuff, controllers or what have you, and you get a new console for not that much. So fundamentally, I think this signals that PlayStation is not changing their strategy. Number one, because they didn't even initiate this. According to what I'm hearing, this was initiated by Xbox. And the only way you would compel PlayStation to agree to this is if they no longer viewed Xbox as a threat. That also means that you won't see any signs anywhere else. Until they start restructuring their studios, changing how their budgets work, we won't see other games making the leap. In fact, a friend of the show, Detective Seeds, who had previously made correct predictions about timing of ports because they have a contact at Nixxes, indicated that Nixxes has said there's nothing else coming to Xbox right now. There's no projects, there's no plans, there's nothing. This is seemingly some kind of a one-off, which would make sense because there's no real Xbox in the future. It'll be some type of a Windows device, which, again, that's not a bad thing. But that means if there's no actual traditional Xbox, then there's no real instance in the future for the strategy to change from PlayStation. Ports to PC come later. Live service games land day and date. That's been in place this entire gen. So if you've been okay with that for the last 4 to 5 years, there's no real reason to be upset now, as this will likely be one of the only instances that something like this happens. First, I want to talk about why I think it could do well. The first and most undeniable thing about Helldivers is that it has viral power. It went viral when it launched, the player numbers were insane, and yes, since then, they did some things that frustrated people on Steam especially, and the player numbers dipped, but then they had that huge resurgence with all the stuff that happened with Super Earth and the Illuminate. So it has that viral power, and I think that is in its corner. It finally coming to Xbox could really garner a lot of people saying, hey, I can't wait to check out that game. My friends have been talking about it, and I've been seeing all the clips. And we also know that Nixxes does very solid ports. And this game just has that sort of knock-around multiplayer vibe that I think really fits with the culture of Xbox, as well as its history. There was a time where many people, myself included, sort of viewed Xbox as the multiplayer platform and PlayStation more as the single-player platform. Now, that was kind of before the Call of Duty landscape shifted and PlayStation took heavy advantages of no longer doing exclusive deals at Xbox, so PlayStation started doing their own, and then that landscape shifted. But overall, I think the history is still very much there, that people view Xbox as more of the multiplayer platform. Now, it's undeniable as well that there could be some cool collaborations here. You could throw in some Master Chief cosmetics, and you're going to get a lot of people that are going to want to start Helldiving, because the armor's a little similar, right? There was even some armor in the game that seemed to reference Master Chief. You could also throw in some Gears of War cosmetics as well, because Gears of War is very iconic, And again, there's similarities between the armor and the vibe and sort of the let's kill bugs vibe of Gears. But Gears of War is another aspect of this, and that's kind of related to why I think this game could also struggle. First and foremost, it's not on Game Pass, and we know that that's a vibe in the Xbox community. That's not scandalous to say that they have fostered a culture of non-purchase. You have figureheads, talking heads, podcasters, YouTubers, people on Twitter, Reddit, and forums who are on the more console war wavelength, and they have for a long time touted and bragged about they don't have to buy games. And that was especially boasted about when a lot of these games started coming over to PlayStation. Like Doom the Dark Ages and others. It was like, well, we don't have to buy those. You guys are buying them. You're a bunch of suckers, okay? So that is a culture that they have fostered. So there could be a ton of people that are like, well, I'm not going to do that. It's a $40 live service game. I play games on Game Pass. And related to the Game Pass factor is Gears of War Reloaded. It's hitting the exact same day. There's 30 million people on Game Pass, roughly. There's roughly, we think by basic estimates, there's about 20 million of those people who can play games day and date. So they're either on Ultimate, they're on PC Game Pass, or they're on an older version of Game Pass that gets the day and date. So maybe 20, 15 million, something. That's a lot of people that could just boot up Gears instead. But, they're sort of choosing between the two. Now, people have pushed back and told me, oh, Gears is not as popular as it once was. Don't underestimate a long-standing franchise hitting a sub fee of like 20 million people and being more inviting than spending money. Especially remember, the purchase trends on Xbox aren't great. There's a clip from one of the kind of funny podcasts floating around right now, and the guy says, listen, when I talk to developers and publishers, they consistently talk about how, game sales on Xbox are trivial. They're not very high. And again, Game Pass is playing a factor there, and it could play a factor now. Another element to consider with Helldivers 2 is that the hype has died down. It's been out for a while. They had their big turnaround moment. They had a bunch of people come back, weapon customization is there, and that got people pretty excited. But if you step into this game right now as a brand new player, it is overwhelming. There are so many war bonds, there's so many things to do, which that could be viewed as a very good thing, but I have always argued, with Helldivers especially, that new user and returning user sort of onboarding is just not where it should be. So if they start hearing from their friends that there's so much in here, there's too much, it's like I'm drowning in stuff to grind and do, that could hurt the word of mouth. Or it could help. It really could go either way. I do think Arrowhead needs to think about that long term. I also think this really should have landed before the big Illuminate event, like maybe they could have got people involved. But you really have to ask the question, if this was initiated by Xbox and sort of negotiated by them, and then it was ported by Nixxes, that means this conversation happened a while ago. That means that Xbox made a compelling case to PlayStation a while ago that, hey, we're not a threat. You don't have to worry about us. You can bring your game over here. It's not going to cause any major issues. It's not something to be concerned about. That means Xbox really knew that their shift with hardware and publishing and all that was well in place. I mean, we've kind of analyzed that when you look at like Forza Horizon coming over and it had like crossplay like day one. It's like, well, that's not something you slap together overnight. So a lot of those times when you had Phil Spencer saying like just 4 games and other elements of the public conversation was very much a smokescreen because this stuff was changing. And speaking of changing, I think the big question we still have to answer and discuss is, does this mean that PlayStation is changing? Now, I already kind of spoke to this, but I do think you have to look at how these companies signal change, and it's usually very early. In late 2023, it was obvious that Xbox was going to be going through some changes. Phil Spencer said things to Famitsu, and then the CFO said things at a Wells Fargo summit, and then Satya Nadella said some things, and it all signaled a shift in their mentality about publishing. It also signaled that, as the CFO said, Nintendo and PlayStation are no longer considered competitors. Until we hear something like that from PlayStation, I don't see this as a sign that anything significant is changing, especially when you sort of couple that with the fact that we have learned from a source that I find to be reliable that this was something initiated by Xbox. What that means is this does not have its origins at PlayStation. It didn't originate from some meeting where they were like, well, we should put Helldivers 2 on Xbox. if it wasn't sort of born out of PlayStation's own initiatives, then again, I don't think this is a signal, because you would see a bunch of things happening. Number one, you would see studios equipped for parallel development, because game development takes a while. Some people would argue it's taking too long. But if the average project is taking somewhere between 4 to 6 years, you would be making preparations now if you were shifting into a third-party publishing strategy. You would be hiring, you would be structuring the studios around that, bringing in people that can help with what is called parallel development, where you're developing a game for multiple platforms, like multiple efforts sort of running in parallel. And currently, we're seeing no signs of that. We're also seeing Nixxes used as a porting company, and then they have said, according to a reliable source, nothing else is planned. This is likely, from my estimation, just a one-off, okay? This could mean that the live service strategy is widening, and I think we would have evidence of that with the next major live service effort from PlayStation, which would be Marvel Tokone Fighting Souls. So if that game lands on PlayStation and PC, and then like a year later lands on Xbox, you could say, oh, they're widening their live service plan. But it also could be related to everything I've said up to now, that Xbox just isn't a threat anymore. Xbox seemingly compelled PlayStation that they're not a threat anymore, because they convinced them to bring the game to Xbox. So the only other game I could see landing in enough time for this to work would be Marvel Tokone Fighting Souls, because in my estimation, by the time we get to like 2027, 2028, Xbox is going to look completely different. They will have almost a cascade of devices. They'll have handhelds made by Asus, handhelds made by other companies. They, according to insiders, have abandoned their own handheld, which calls into question any other hardware commitments that they make, because they keep making commitments and they keep saying that they're going to do things, and then the reality is very different than what everybody thinks. I have a video on this channel called Proceed with Caution. That's what it's all about, is that they'll say things that are technically true, gives people a false impression. So I'm just advising caution. You don't know what their hardware is going to look like. Seemingly, whatever their hardware looks like, they made a very compelling case to PlayStation to bring Helldivers 2 to their current hardware, okay? So at the end here, the only real conclusion to come to is this. My own concern about all of this has always been about quality management. It has never bothered me to see a game go to another platform. I have always enjoyed seeing games built for one platform because I feel like I get better games. So I was excited when some of my favorite games went to PC, and I encourage people, buy Returnal, buy Ghost of Tsushima. They're great games. It never upset me. I was very critical when PlayStation ported games that weren't ready, like The Last of Us Part 1 and Spider-Man 2, because, again, when my primary concern is quality, you don't like to see a good piece of property, you don't like to see a good product brought to a pretty big audience, Steam, in such bad shape. There were people that celebrated that because they're so hardcore in the console war that they didn't even want those games to go to PC. So you see, there's very different responses here, and my response has been very consistent that quality is the primary concern. So with Helldivers 2 now on Xbox, who's going to handle quality of life? Who's going to handle those patches? That may require some extra bandwidth from Arrowhead. Now, Nixxes has handled the patches of their ports in the past, but those are not live service games. So this could be very different, and my hope would be it does not hinder future development or ideas that Arrowhead has, because maybe they're spending more time getting sort of spread thin across the multiple platforms. The key takeaway here is that PlayStation had to be convinced, since they didn't initiate this, which to me I think really signals that everybody should sort of calm down and temper back those reactions. Listen, if you feel, according to your convictions, that you got to sell your PlayStation and abandon the platform and that they've betrayed you, I'm not trying to convince you to have different convictions and feelings, but I'm trying to give some context as to why this does not signal some huge, giant change. As I said from the outset, Xbox is not a threat. PlayStation was convinced they're not a threat, and Helldivers 2 going over has more to do with Xbox changing than PlayStation changing. But those are just my thoughts. If you think I'm wrong, you can leave comments below or show up to those live streams to discuss. So hit like, hit subscribe, hit share these videos with other people, and I'll see you in the next video.